So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Rabbi yahfadhku, inshallah. Today is the first day, inshallah, for Asma Allah al-Husna session. Now, with Asma Allah al-Husna, of course, we're going to be doing a couple things in where we're not just going to talk about Asma Allah al-Husna, but first, let's actually look at what the sessions are going to look like. With Asma Allah al-Husna, of course, there are 99 names for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in the first session, this is what we're going to do. We're going to first, I guess, introduce myself and introduce you as well if you want. And then we're going to talk about the references that we're going to be doing for this class. We're going to be talking about the importance of the 99 names. Why are we even learning this class? What are the resources and where did the idea of having 99 names come from? Are there only 99 names or are there even more than that? Can I make up my own name? And what can we do with these names? What are they really for? Number three, the fundamental foundations for the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm not going to keep on saying 99 names of Allah, so we'll just use the word names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, there is one particular surah, Ayat al-Kursi, which actually stands out to bring about the foundations for understanding the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What about Ayat al-Kursi? Why Ayat al-Kursi? What is in it? And plus, when you say the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you talk about the names, what are those supposed to do to us? How are the names in the descriptions at all going to be influencing our deen? How does that affect a Muslim? What is that supposed to let us learn about Allah? How is that supposed to make us into the connection, a spiritual connection or a religious transformation, if you would want? The categories for the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How is one name different? Why are there names and attributes? What are the attributes supposed to be? Attributes for what? The names, what are they names for? What are they describing? And why is it important to even know about the description? Is God just an anonymous figure in the heavens where Muslims don't have any relationship with, like many of the different religions would want to bring about those misconceptions that Muslims don't have any relationship because they don't even have an image for God. So therefore, he's a remote figure that they don't have a connection with. And similar to Bani Israel, they wanted something that they could touch, something that they could feel, something that they could see. And that is what Bani Israel wanted. Are Muslims right now really understanding the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala become something that is remote, something that is far away, something that is anonymous to them? Or what really are the 99 names or the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala supposed to teach us? What are the categories of those names? What are the most important areas of what we're supposed to learn about the names? The categories for the meanings of the different names. Why are we even putting them in categories? Why can't we just say each and every single one of those names and what they really mean? So first we put them into categories, then in the coming sessions, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then we will be talking about the different names for as long as basically the time covers. How are you going to talk about those names? Are you just going to talk about the name and start going into some kind of a detail and where what that name means and that's it? No, we're going to go in 3 different ways. For the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first, we're going to be talking about the name. We're going to be talking about how the name is connected in the ayat, or at least in the hadith, in order for us to understand what that name is supposed to inspire us in, or inspire us with, or inspire us in general, not only about Allah, but about ourselves. What? The name is going to inspire us about ourselves? Certainly, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had laid out the names for you to see about Allah and for you to recognize that particular need that is basically something that you do not have as a creature. So we'll talk about that area. So first, introduce the name. Two, introduce the relationship between the name and even those different texts and where how the context it was set up in. And number three, how we can use those names in order to grow in our deen, grow in our foundation, Iman, and grow in our foundation in the piece of application in our life. How is that even possible? So that's what we'll be talking about, inshallah. So that's where sessions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 will actually be covering those areas. So what I actually had wanted to use in terms of references are basically these three books. They're pretty good books, really. And if you see, you could actually click on the hyperlink, in other words, in the chat, and you could actually find those books, something that you can get basically for free, and you don't even have to pay anything, and you could just get it as a PDF, which is pretty good because you could use your iPad and then just basically scroll and take your time to learn these names. Now, this is extremely important because that will, inshallah, help you relate to sometimes you may not pick something up or pick up something up or probably understand from the lecture. It's possible. So when you go through what is written, you're capable of keeping track, one of your notes, two, keeping track of probably something I might not have said, and they might actually say it differently. And number three, they'll also give you, let's call it this blueprint for you to relate to help you bring about a foundation for the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a book that you can put hands on for you to just read and scroll. I'm going to use those three different resources and some other resources as well, inshallah, to help us, I guess, go over them. Let's look at these resources, and I already had them open, so you don't have to necessarily think of, I want to right there, download them now and all of that. Let's just look into the first one, a summarized explanation of Allah's beautiful names. Now, you could see that it says Abdul Razzaq Abdul Muhsin al-Badr. So this scholar is actually specialized in Aqidah. And one thing that he had done, which most books on Aqidah don't do, is eliminate a lot of those influences that were, I would say, rampant in Islamic history. And that's extremely dangerous because when I would say many of the Aqidah classes, when they went into speaking about those different, let's say, cults, client, those different groups, those different mubtadi'a or whatever it is, whatever you want to call them, they were influenced by the Greek philosophy and all those different philosophies out there. And then they went into such debates, and then they went into different groups of Asha'ira, Maturidiyya, and Mu'tazila, and the list goes on and on. And that became something that really took away what was supposed to be a beautiful thing to learn into becoming nothing but a futile discussion that was basically nothing that was getting us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead of thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those discussions, they became the area in the center of how we can make our own selves, an arrogance that was becoming the center. That wasn't supposed to be how we would learn the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why this book, I think, does an outstanding job in eliminating all those different groups, all those different conversations, and gets to describing the name, gets to talking about the name, and takes us into understanding the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way where it relates to us spiritually. So that's one thing. But here's one thing. This is actually a summary and not the actual book. You could see it's actually in 188 pages. The actual book is actually in 336 pages. That's the actual book. So sometimes you will see me, I guess, putting these two books in where, laying out the Arabic version of it for you to kind of see. Let's say sometimes I might actually go to let's call it the complete version for that book and not the summary. Sometimes I'll jump into it and I'll basically start hovering over it with my mouse so you could actually see exactly the verse, the text. So usually I will use the Arabic note in order for you to see the actual text. And this is extremely important because we, as right now, students of ilm, we want to go to the back end. We are trying to grow. We're not here just wanting to get a taste of ilm, but we really want to, let's call it, digest ilm. And that's exactly what Ahmad Chalabi had said. He had actually said that when we're speaking about ilm and when we're speaking about books, some of them you just really need to snack on. Other books you really need to digest and fully chew on in order to really get the necessary nutrients. In other books, you just need to kind of get a sandwich in where I'm just getting a fast meal to not necessarily a snack, but a fast meal for the time being to move on. So that's where, sometimes I would say this would be our sandwich, but this would actually be our main nutrient. But our main nutrient sometimes for students that are probably not completely, I guess, ready for the big solids, they might need to get, give me a solid, but get me something to basically chew on, something that I'm capable of chewing on. So don't worry, I won't give you solids and make you choke. We'll basically work our way into knowing, one, the text itself and making you see it, and at the same time, see the translation right there. So get used to seeing that, inshallah. But I won't be using this book all the time. I'll mainly be using different resources, and you could see in where right there it says a summarized explanation of the beautiful names and what this book for Isadi. Isadi was actually the teacher for Ibn Uthaymeen. And what's really nice about this book, and where he really went into this beautiful details about the names, but what I liked about this book mainly is the translation. Not always will you have books that are Islamic books that are actually coming with a good translation, and that's why oftentimes it becomes am I hungry, Noura? No, I'm not hungry, Noura. I'm here just quoting on how we see the books, and it's important to, like I said, here's one thing. Speaking of which, I'm just going to jump off of this for a bit. You know, yesterday, someone called me and they said, how do you relate to the different conferences out there? Are they really of any importance? So I said, well, here's one thing. Some people, they actually need these conferences because we're talking about the younger generation. And most of the people, what they want out of these big conferences is really an emotional support. And let's call it social acceptance in some form of a social relationship that they can bond with. Those are the early and those are the beginners that are definitely making and needing these kind of conferences. Are they areas where you could actually get ilm? The answer is no. True ilm is actually coming from those sessions that I would sometimes say boring, sometimes I would say, let's call it full of nutrients that sometimes you would actually find the foods that are full of nutrients are not necessarily, let's call it exotic in their taste. But it isn't until later that what appeared to be boring at one time will actually be what is getting you stronger, what is getting you well-founded, what is getting you all that vision that will be long lasting. In other words, that is the true amusement. The true ilm is basically that gets you mature, mature in even in your understanding and deen, mature in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, mature in your foundation, gives you the expansion in your vision, gives you basically that spirituality that is long lasting. There's a difference between getting a snack and sugar in where it kind of feels good at that moment that you first eat it. But after that, if you're snacking and thinking that you're going to be getting that sugar to give you all that nutrient that you want, but what you won't recognize is that it becomes a sugar rush, but after that, you'll basically be low of energy. You'll be low of energy sooner than you think. And that's the same thing. If you really want to stay strong in your energy, strong in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / spirituality, you really have to go to the foundations. It's not enough to listen to these lectures, but you really got to take the time to really spend in using your time to listen to other lectures, 2, taking the time to read, 3, taking the time to memorize. This is important. Memorize. I know that the Western / American systems are not invested and are not necessarily, I guess, so fascinated with memorization because after all, they'll say it's just about you knowing the information, thinking about it, and that's it. Well, in Islamic history, the method of teaching is different. It's not enough to know the information, but it's important to memorize it as well. Why? That's why it's important to connect with with these ayat, with these resources. Why memorizing? Because with memorizing, you're relating with deeper roots in where you're letting these words really get engraved in your mind, in your heart, and simply you are letting and teaching yourself, you're letting yourself repeat on and on, in where such a repetition becomes a word of mouth to later on radiating and bring about the light within your heart. So taking the time to memorize certain words, memorize certain names, memorizing comes how? With lots and lots of repetition. Why the repetition? Because the words in Lugha Arabiya, they actually have this little secret. What is the secret? In Lugha Arabiya, the words themselves, there's actually a sound in it that comes with a certain relationship in how the words are articulated and how they would basically have that vibration relate to your body. So when you look at the word Allah, it basically comes from an inner space, an inner opening in where your lungs are relating, your body is relating, and you're letting a certain vibration, a certain air, a certain momentum come with all of that name repetition that you would be saying. Now, here's one thing. I'm not going to make it a class of some form of a yoga in where we're spending some time in where, yes, say the name Allah and feel the words in where the air go in and out and inhale and exhale. We're not going to be doing that because the Prophet ﷺ did not practice it in this way. To practice it in that way is basically coming in with some form of a bid'ah, but at least recognize just that area in where it's important to do some form of that recognition, of that repetition, of that at least form of dhikr. Give me a second, then I'll be back. I had to turn on the other AC because I could see that I'm probably getting too excited about the class that I'm right now getting overheated. Okay, let's see the different books. The second book, Explanation to the Beautiful and Perfect Names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did a very good translation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Rabbi bless them. Not always will you have English books or at least Islamic studies books with good translations. So that actually becomes sometimes hard to find. So when you have an English translation for, let's say, a Aqidah book, something rather sometimes sophisticated for so for many, but the whole idea of Aqidah to make it something relatable, to make it something that I can find spirituality in it. I can find my own self in where I'm connecting with Aqidah because it's supposed to be what's supposed to be in it is that inspiration. What's supposed to be in it is the main foundation. What's supposed to be in it is something that is supposed to be engraved in my mind, my heart, so it can change and bring about a transformation on my body. The other book that I would always recommend as my favorite book in Aqidah is basically this book. But of course, we were doing Aqidah up until page 81. So the part about Asma Allah al-Husna really starts from page 81. But this book is probably my favorite book in Aqidah, period. Taking the time to basically learn this foundation is key. What is that book called? You could see it's called is Summarized Islamic Fiqh in the Light of Quran and Sunnah, Part 1. Well, what this author did, I think he didn't get the recognition that he deserves, to be honest. But the translation is outstanding. And I mean outstanding. Anyhow, so what he did, he basically wanted to do all the different sciences and basically bring about a summary, break it down, and basically I would probably recommend these series. This is just part one. You've got 5 different series. I'd probably recommend them even over Bilal Phillips' books. So if I were to consider an Islamic studies curriculum, I'd probably use this one for adults, or perhaps at least for the older teenagers. I definitely use this one because what he did is that he basically put them in different partitions. So Aqidah comes in part one, number two, part two basically carries the same name and basically goes into ibadat and goes into Islamic fiqh and etc. And with an outstanding translation, hey, what more would you want? And what he did, of course, the book is available, very well translated, puts it in beautiful categories, goes into these beautiful details, and makes it really easy for us to relate to. So here we go. What we're gonna do, we're basically just gonna be taking from page 81 because all the other pages up until 81, we were actually doing it in Aqidah 1 class. So this basically is a continuation for our Aqidah class. So if you missed out on the other one, definitely go to it. But if you are not capable of going to it, don't worry. At least continue with us. And inshallah, it will be something that you will find. So 14 is actually considered an adult in Islam. I think sometimes we really underestimate those teenagers ages 13 and 14 and up, and keep treating them like they're young children. But in Islam, once you reach the age of puberty, that's one sign that your mind is right now capable of recognizing and being a lot more mature than what others would anticipate. So Islam considers that once you reach the age of puberty, that well, you should right now be treated as an adult and you should act like one. And therefore, do we put 7 to 14 in one category? The answer is I'm not sure I'm agreeing with you on that, but I would say 7 to 10 for the ages 7 to 10 or perhaps 7 to 12. I would probably recommend perhaps other books, other Islamic books. We've got some that are starting to right now go up, and it's I Love Islam. There's that curriculum. There is the curriculum in where, what was it? Inshallah, I'll get those books for you, inshallah. Right now you could see, I guess, for I'm more into the youth and actually the younger generation. So, you know, those are different curriculums. But for the youth, if this book was too advanced for the youth ages, let's say 13 and up, I would definitely then recommend going for Bilal Phillips if this is too advanced. Okay, let's start with right there. So this is just an intro right there. And now you got to know what books we're going to be using. You just got to know, of course, how and what we're going to be talking about in terms of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's talk about the importance of the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their relationship with our spirituality. Is there a relationship at all? What is it supposed to be? So we'll go in over each and every single one of these. Well, a couple things to say when we're talking about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number one is that when we're speaking about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just keep in mind in where the Prophet ﷺ had actually said in this hadith, مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. In this hadith, when you see it says muttafaqun alayh, that actually means it was agreed upon between Bukhari and Muslim that this hadith is authentic. What does this hadith really say anyways? Whoever Allah wills that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give them the best, would give them, of course, the greatest bounty is basically when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give them knowledge in the deen. Well, knowledge in the deen, although the word here is actually used fiqh, yufaqih, to actually meaning give them fiqh. Well, at the time, the word fiqh did not necessarily be exclusive to Islamic legislature, but it was actually to include all the different sciences of the deen. And the most important science is basically when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَمَنْ أَسَّسَ بُنْيَانَهُ عَلَى تَقْوَى مِنَ اللَّهِ وَرِضْوَانٍ خَيْرٌ أَمْ مَنْ أَسَّسَ بُنْيَانَهُ عَلَى شَفَا جُرُفٍ هَارٍ فَانْهَارَ بِهِ فِي نَارِ جَهَنَّمَ. Look at this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if a person that had basically started and founded their buildings on strong basis of taqwa, a strong basis of relationship with the Lord Almighty, fear of the Lord Almighty, strong love to the point that a person would be afraid that the Lord Almighty would be discontent over them if they were to go beyond the principles of the Lord Almighty. If they're on taqwa min Allah, and even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content over them in what they were really founded on. They were founded on the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is better? Is that better? Or is that even comparable to a person that they had basically founded their own building, their own life on the edge of something that was not even strong and formidable to hold itself, let alone hold your building? And then what they will not recognize is that it will be basically collapsing on them, but we're collapsing on them in basically the valleys of hellfire without them realizing. What actually makes the strong foundation? What makes that foundation to give us taqwa, to give us Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's content, to make us of that strong foundation to relate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? There are two kinds of knowledge. Let's look at that. There is توحيد المعرفة والإثبات, and there's توحيد الإرادة والطلب. What does that mean? Let me translate that in English right there. There's the kind in where knowing about God, in where it's basically just general knowledge, and let's write it right there, just general knowledge, or sometimes let's call it confirmation, in where you're confirming your knowledge about something, but that doesn't necessarily mean you truly have that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So knowing about Allah Almighty in terms of, I guess, His existence, or knowing some information about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names and attributes is generally something that many people would know. Even a Christian, they'll have a relationship with God Almighty because they'll recognize, they'll tell you, hey, hallelujah, I saw God's power. And hey, when He answered my prayer, you'll have Stephen Harvey talk about the importance of prayer, and he'll start crying and tell you, hey, I basically was a homeless man, and then one day I prayed to God and I said, I will, if you give me that success, I will tell people about you, and you will see. This is basically him relating to what all humans would relate to, which is the type of recognizing the Lord Almighty in some, at least, of the signs, the attributes, the names, so recognizes certain powers. But then there's the other part, which is توحيد الإرادة والطلب. To know about God as a general knowledge is something that is basically within all mankind. Well, that's why the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, كل مولود يولد على الفطرة. Every single person is born with some instinct where they recognize not necessarily God, Allah, but they'll recognize that there is this supernatural being out there that is controlling the world, that is basically putting in, well, controlling the energy, controlling the world, some form of power. But it isn't until, of course, the prophets and the messengers, they would shed the light to tell us, well, what you're feeling on the inside is basically Allah, is basically that supernatural being that you may see the power, the implications in the world around you. But here's what you really need to do, which is al-irada wa talab. You need to put in order to relate to this God, you really need to put in irada. You really need to put in, invest your own will, invest your own consistency, in where perseverance to really figure out and know what this God that created us really wanted of us. In other words, create a conviction. Al-irada is conviction. Al-talab is basically request and seeking. In other words, it's part of a human nature that we have the instinct to relate to God. Well, that's basically what Islam tells us. But I don't remember any of this. I don't remember that I was, or even feel that there's anything that instinct. I don't feel hungry to know about God. So there's an instinct in where it relates to your body. You feel hungry, you recognize that you need food. You feel afraid, you recognize that you need to find ways to secure you. You feel those are the earliest, or those are the first instincts that we as human beings recognize when we're first born: hunger and fear. And that's why we start getting scared when we're outside of our mother's wombs, and our arms would be stretching out of fear because we all of a sudden feel that we're insecure. But the child doesn't even know what security is. He doesn't even know what death is. The baby doesn't even know what it means to basically be of any type of fear. How is it that the baby is feeling fear? And it isn't until we basically come and cuddle the baby that the baby recognizes, I'm safe again, and is quiet again. Same thing when, yes, certainly, is it fear? Is it pain that the baby is crying over? It's actually a combination of fear and pain. Definitely the amount of pressure when, of course, all those contractions are on the baby, the amount of pressure isn't only on the mother, but is also on the baby, squeezing the baby. And the baby's all of a sudden feeling that they're out in the world and not anymore cuddled in the mother's womb of mercy and rahmah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Prophet ﷺ had actually explained that rahim was actually derived from the word rahim. The womb doesn't really give it and do it its service, because in Lugha Arabiya, the word rahim actually comes from the word rahmah, affection, mercy. But the word womb in English doesn't really do its service, doesn't really give it what it deserves, like in Lugha Arabiya. That's why I said Lugha Arabiya actually has many secrets, many seas that you really need to dig deep to see and find its pearls. And that's why it's extremely rich. And that's why even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the Quran to be in Lugha Arabiya, because not necessarily to consider the Arab as superior, but the language itself was chosen by the Lord Almighty because of the way that it is actually structured and because of the inspiration it can bring. And certainly because of the rich meanings that it can basically give in where meanings, inspiration, and certainly in where that vibration to make, of course, a change on your mind, on your heart, and even later vibrating strongly in changing your behavior and your body speaking of that inspiration. Okay, so why don't we remember any of what you're talking about in terms of that there's an instinct because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, well, let you know that خلقكم لا تعلمون شيئا. When you were first born, when you were created, you were first born with no any information whatsoever. But the information that you get is not necessarily only information that your brain stores. That's one type of data that comes through experience, through, of course, more cognitive skills to help you do some of that. But the stored information in you is stored in different ways. Some of that information is stored in your DNA. Some of that information is stored in your heart. Some of that information is stored in your brain without you realizing how, when. Remember, when you're talking about yourself, for example, you've got your parents' eyes, your mother's nose, your dad's lips, and your grandmother's toes, and whatever. How is it that you got these different areas when you didn't even recall any of such data being stored? There's some data that is transcending far beyond your recognition, far beyond your memory, far beyond for you to even recognize that it's there. Part of that information that is stored is this information that is the fitrah to knowing Allah. It's inside. Where does it go? Why don't I feel it? It's basically something that becomes lost because our brain is focused elsewhere. Our basically body is giving us that focus in where what we're doing. And oftentimes, and most of the times, it is we're trying to feed our body with entertainment, with probably certain things in where we're basically part of our body is relating to where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that even some animals وَمَا مِن طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا طَائِرٍ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحَيْهِ إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ. There are so many animals that would walk on earth and birds that would fly up in the air, that you have a lot of comparison, a lot of similarities with these creatures. Some of these similarities are basically the similarities in where we're basically here feeling that we need to eat, drink, and reproduce in order to somehow secure our existence. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, there's some part of fitrah in you and where you need to seek that, but be careful because you, even though you have some shared instincts with animals, you're not an animal because you have what no other creature has. Two things. One is your intellect. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story of Adam alayhi salam with the malaika, in where Adam right there, and we're trying trying to stand right there, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة. When he had told the angels, I'm going to be creating a khalifa, vicegerent. I'm going to be creating another creature. Well, what is that creature? Is that creature going to do the same kind of bloodshed, the same kind of destruction? What is it going to do? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then displays what Adam has that is completely different from other creatures. And this one, علم آدم الأسماء كلها. He basically taught Adam the names of things. Let him display that he's got an intellect, cognitive skills that no other creature, including the malaika, have. In where right there, but even though right there was displaying this potential, but this potential can sometimes be pacified by something else without Adam or even the children of Adam recognizing. That's where Iblis comes in and basically لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ ذُرِّيَّتَهُ. I will right there start rubbing onto them and let them forget everything that you had stored inside their minds, inside their hearts, and I will make them forget it. How? By basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that in Surah Al-An'am, what will Iblis do? He will basically use one main thing to control the heart, to control the body, to control the mind. He will basically use one key thing. What is it? وَلَآمُرَنَّهُمْ. What will they do? They will يُبَتِّكُنَّ أَذَانَ الْأَنْعَامِ. And أمرنهم وليغيرن خلق الله. I will let them change the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Get them busy. You need a filler. You need Botox. You need to change your appearance. Oh, no one's liking you. Look at you. You're not fitting in. You need this. You need, you know what? You don't look good enough. What is it? It's basically just considered about the appearance. Just considered about, hey, you really need to put in the piercing would make you look better, but it's harming my body. But it's really worth the social acceptance, don't you think? And then we go into that. Well, the tattoo, hey, it's basically to let you identify yourself. Man, I sound so scary like a shaitan, don't I? Well, that's the shaitan. That's how shaitan would actually speak in our minds, and without us realizing in where shaitan would actually make us forget our spirituality, our hearts, our minds by focusing on our body and bringing in more and more feeding to our body entertainment in that way. So that actually takes us into bringing in conviction and talab. How do we feed? How do we bring in that knowledge? How do we bring in that confirmation with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stored in our hearts, stored in our minds, stored in our own instinct? Well, that actually comes in with conviction and also needing to put in some effort in order to bring about that recognition to the surface. There's no way that you can let that data that is stored in you come out to the surface and have the power to basically bring about a change in you, an inspiration in you, unless you put in the effort to eliminating shaitan's power over your body, shaitan's power over your heart, shaitan's power over your vision. And that's what will bring about that tawheed, in where that comes with الله الذي خلق الله الذي خلق سبع سماوات ومن الأرض مثلهن يتنزل الأمر بينهن لتعلموا أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. two words that I want you to see here. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, well, Allah is the one that created the seven heavens and even the earth, and where mithlahun, in where similar creations. You could see that there's a pattern, there's a paradigm in this whole universe that basically lets you see that this pattern is all related together, in where, hey, what you see is up in the skies, the different atmospheres, the different levels of different airs and atmospheres is basically related to even the earth, and the creation on earth is related to even the sun and the moon and all of that, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you see that the whole universe is created with one power, and that power is the power يَتَنَزَّلُ الْأَمْرُ بَيْنَهُنْ. That power is basically keeping things intact and keeping things in one function. That power is the power of the Lord Almighty, and not the power of matter in motion. Matter in motion is basically wanting us to believe that it's just what is the matter that is stored, and the energy that is stored in this matter is what's controlling the universe. In other words, eliminating any power for the Lord Almighty, in considering that things that matter on its own just basically forces some form of power, some form of self-integrated energy, making everything functioning the way it is, and without us realizing, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, what I want you to know is that the truth of the matter, لِتَعْلَمُوا, that's the key for you to know, for you to learn, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the revelation, let you know and see with your intellect the different systems, the different relationships with these systems, and how they're actually functioning together, in where it is impossible that this matter had created itself, but it is actually created by the Lord Almighty. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِتَعْلَمُوا. This لِتَعْلَمُوا is key to two of these. Number one, لِتَعْلَمُوا, in where for the general human knowledge, but there's another type in where you would recognize when you had matured in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where it's not just general knowledge about knowing the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and some knowledge about knowing the powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there's actually a stronger, a deeper, a more mature recognition that would only come with some form of conviction, some form of seeking, some form of putting in a lot of power to eliminate the shaitan influence, and let that recognition come to the surface with a strong power, in where what power? لِتَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. For you, in where you would come to a strong conviction, a strong relationship, a strong recognition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all powerful, that He is the actual force that's controlling the world, and أن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. But don't let your knowledge of things make you think that somehow you're going to be in control of the world, and thinking that we don't need God. Science is capable of helping us know everything about the world, and therefore we could be the masters of the world one day, and therefore probably even creating human beings and all of that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ أَحَاطَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically encompassed all the knowledge. You will have some knowledge, but not encompass all the knowledge. You can know about your moment, but there's no way that you can know al-ghaib. There's no way that you can know the future. There's no way that you can know a lot of what happens in the past. You can do certain studies, you can do certain cameras to detect certain information, to give you and restore and store certain information. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ahata, to what level? To what's even on the intention, to what's even within you, in where He's al-Latif. We'll get to those names in where, well, how do we actually get this knowledge? And how do we get to this recognition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had surpassed all the knowledge, had actually went into letting us see beyond the simple knowledge about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but actually going farther in where we're seeing to the point that, look at Hadith Jibreel. Hadith Jibreel, in where there's no way that you can grow in your deen without one thing. Let's look at Hadith Jibreel again and again. That will always be in the spotlight. What is Hadith Jibreel? Hadith Jibreel basically goes as follows. The Prophet ﷺ was sitting with the Sahaba. While he was sitting with the Sahaba, a man, Umar ibn al-Khattab, explains the story and how and what happened. Umar ibn al-Khattab is sitting with the Prophet ﷺ. A man comes over. This man, everybody's looking at him. This man, very handsome, dressed in white, very black hair, comes in and just sits right in front of the Prophet ﷺ. The Sahaba are saying, well, none of us knew who he was. This person doesn't even have any impact of any traveling and any of that sort. He's basically as if it's just to do one thing, as if he just appeared just instantly. And then sits in front of the Prophet ﷺ, puts his hands over his thighs and says, "Oh Muhammad, tell me about Islam." Now, here's one thing. When you compare this person and the way that he came in, there were many times where people would come in and the Prophet ﷺ would be sitting with the Sahaba, and then they would say, well, which one of you is Muhammad? But this man comes in, knows exactly what he's up to, and sits in front of the Prophet ﷺ and says, "Oh Muhammad, tell me about Islam." And the Prophet ﷺ says, Islam is an tashhada, to bear witness that there's no God worthy of worship but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, to perform the prayers, to do the zakah, to do siyam, and to do hajj. And he said, you're right. But then he says, well, tell me about Iman. This is the key. And he says, أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر. It's to have the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His angels, His books, there's the scriptures, and His messengers, and the judgment day, well, actually بالقدر خيره وشره, in where the destiny, the good and the evil of it. And he basically said, Sadaqt again. So the Sahaba are sitting right there. Well, wait a minute. Are you coming to inquire about something, or are you here acting as a teacher? Are you a teacher to say Sadaqt and confirm, or are you a student to come and learn? And that's when they said, Ajibna, we were astonished, we were surprised, we were perplexed to what is actually happening right before our eyes right there. But that's when he said, third question, he said, what is al-ihsan? What is al-ihsan? What is the level of ihsan? And the Prophet ﷺ said, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. It's basically to worship Allah as if you could see Allah. For if you cannot see him, he could see you. And that's when he had asked, well, what are and tell me about the signs of Judgment Day. And he said, well, the person that is asking has no more information than the person that is being questioned. He said, well, tell me the signs of it. And the list goes on and on. Isn't until later that the Prophet ﷺ asks Umar, do you know and did you recognize the man that came the other day? And he said, no. He said, well, that was Jibreel. He had come to teach you your deen. It was a complete demonstration. It was right there, Jibreel, in a form of a human being, coming to ask me, coming to question, to basically teach you in a form of right there demonstration, so you could see question and answer, for you to hear it with your own ears. What is important in this hadith is a couple of things, but we're not going to go. So that we're not going to go in all the details in this hadith, but what is important in this hadith is basically three key things. Number one, in where the Prophet ﷺ said, "An tashhada." Number two, when he said about the level of iman, he said, "An tu'mina." And number three, he basically said, "An ta'budallah ka'annaka tara." It's a form of vision from stage one, the stage of Islam, the stage of Iman, and the stage of Ihsan. In the stage of Islam, he basically said, "An tashhada," to bear witness. This actually falls within this category, in where there's a confirmation, there's a recognition that there is the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the stage of Iman, that doesn't actually happen until the person grows in their conviction, in their irada, in their request, in their commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That isn't until the person invests an amount of energy, an amount of commitment, are they going to be capable of relating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with al-asma and the sifat, with the names and attributes that will not be in the level of Islam, although there has to be some level in where in faith in al-asma wa sifat and the names and attributes, it actually is part of Tawheed, it's part of Aqidah, it's part of what it means, an tashhada an la ilaha illallah. There's no doubt about that. But to go deeper in that conviction, in where you go from a stage in where, yes, you recognize Islam is the true religion, you recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to a grounded faith in going into maturing in your deen, that actually comes with a lot of conviction, a lot of elimination. Why did you say elimination? Because remember, even when you look at the word of Tawheed, La ilaha illallah, there are two sides. La ilaha, in where it's eliminating and completely negating the existence of any God, and then it confirms illallah, there's only one God worthy of worship. Now, when you look at that, it's not an oxymoron. It's basically to let you keep in mind that you're going to eliminate anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're confirming and affirming only one side, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How does that happen? Well, it's not only negation or negating and affirming one thing, even in Tawheed, but that's the same thing even when it comes to the conviction, and where to grow in your relationship, to grow in your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are a lot of things that you have to eliminate even in your diet. And when I say eliminating in your diet, I'm talking about eliminating in the diet that you eat, or even eliminating as part of the environment. There are certain friends that you gotta remove. There are certain places that you just cannot go to. There are certain friends that you really cannot relate to. You really gotta get them out of your orbit. You are trying to replace from having those friends be your orbit, that food to be your orbit, that area to be your orbit, to having Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be your center of one, your center of one authority, two, your center of decision making, three, your center in where place of guidance. Now, it isn't until those areas are basically centered around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're going to be capable of going from a relationship, let's call it an emotional relationship. Because in the first stage in Islam, it's more trying to put you on this emotional relationship because it's an tashhada. It's an emotional relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're trying to learn and practice on your salah. You're probably not focused always. You might be praying many times. You're not focused on your salah. You're trying to put in that focus, but many times your mind just guess all of a sudden it's just remembering probably what is on the stove or probably what you want to do tomorrow and all of that. And you could see sometimes you're battling yourself. Should I put on hijab? Should I not? Battling yourself. Should I stay committed with my fast? And should I stay committed with this? And of course, many of those that are basically taking Islam as an experiment. And they'll say, it wasn't for me. I tried. I didn't feel anything. Well, that stage of Islam, I'll call it in the early stage of Islam. And even the stage of Islam, there's the level in where they're the outside and the outcasts of Islam, and there are others that no, they're actually inside Islam. Those that are on the outcast of Islam, they're still right there, more closer to the level of munafiqeen and perhaps munafiqeen without them realizing, not necessarily munafiqeen where they're not believing, but they're actually munafiqeen where their practices are not showing any commitment. It isn't until, of course, in the beginning, they're just wanting some emotional support in order to stay intact within Islam. But a Muslim, no, they recognize that they've got that foundation, they've got that commitment, they're trying to grow in their salah, they're getting some ilm because they're trying to put their vision in place. They're putting in some ilm, they're putting in some conviction. That's the stage of Islam. They're working on their salah beautifully, their zakah, etc., their hajj, etc. But then with the stage of iman, no, it actually grew with the foundation, mainly with learning the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where that was key. Why? Because when the person goes into the stage of ibadah, the stage of worship, but worship is farther than just ritual. Worship is more comprehensive than ritual, because worship actually encompasses a relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you're going in where your principle, let's call it your behavior, you're letting it bow down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you recognize that the different things in the world around you, they won't bend to you. You recognize that I have to bend myself to Allah. But how do I bend to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, in order for you to grow in your iman, فَاعْلَمُوا, you need to take in the time to learn. How do I learn? Is it just a piece of information? No. It's not an information necessarily in where, okay, I know, lesson learned, all done. No. العلم is different types of levels. There's the ilm, in where the first stage, in where you know the information, give you this information, you know it. But then there's the ilm, in where there is ilm al-yaqeen. Ilm al-yaqeen is different, because ilm al-yaqeen, you know it wholeheartedly. It's such a strong conviction, such a strong faith, that nothing will erase it from your heart. It becomes so engraved, so strong, so rooted in your heart, that nothing will take it away. Your mind is so set to it, it becomes fixated in where you see it all the time. You know, most of that knowledge, believe it or not, studies would tell us that pain is the strongest thing that we as human beings could basically store in our mind. Pain. Pain is perhaps the strongest thing that created civilization. Civilizations are basically created because we were trying to eliminate pain. Pain is what got us motivated in different ways, in where if it wasn't for pain, we wouldn't have basically searched for different knowledge in medicine. If it wasn't for a fear and a pain of basically losing our loved ones, or pain and we're recognizing death and pain that might actually be there, we're running away from pain. Pain basically is the main motivator that keeps us going in where we're trying to get an education, we're trying to basically get a job because we're afraid maybe of that pain of hunger, the pain of being left with no place of survival, no roof on the top of our heads, where that pain is always haunting us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets you know that a lot of what you are worried about is actually coming in with your own human nature. And in order for you to know Allah, know that pain that you're afraid of. You're afraid of poverty. You're afraid of death. You're afraid of illness. You're afraid of failure. You're afraid of the hereafter, what's going to happen. You're afraid of so many different things. That's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names come in as what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names come in to help you know that your security, your pain elimination, you come in to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what will give you the peace. The time that we're living in today, with the rise of mental illness, a large piece of it, a large portion of it is, I would like to claim that a lot of it is basically a miscategory, in where a lot of it is actually coming in where it's fear of pain, whether it's a trauma from the past or whether it's a fear of the future, really coming in as part of the human instinct, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us the revelation, sent us the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as for that category that is wrongly put in as part of mental illness, is confused right there, when in reality, it's actually spiritual illness. not mental illness. That's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically told us, well, many are actually confusing it as mental illness, but in reality, it's coming in as part of the human nature, where it's pain, feeling insecurity, it's fear of the past, it's fear of the future, and worry from the past that's haunting us human beings, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He's not within your heart, then certainly you're definitely going to be living a trauma from the past, because you don't, if a person doesn't recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that brings in justice, and where injustice will never prevail, and that one day you will get the justice that you deserve. The justice basically isn't the justice isn't the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same thing. If you're afraid of poverty, you're afraid of the future, you're afraid of an illness, you're afraid of death, you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one that brings security. He is the one that brings you all the comfort that you need, in where He is al-Latif, He is al-Khabir, He is al-Alim, He is the one to have the knowledge, He is the one to give you victory, He is the one to give you compassion, He is the one to give you the affection, He is the one, all the different things that you as a human being were actually were created in search of. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one, in where that is part of your instinct. What you feel is empty within your life, within your future, within your past, within your creation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to really fill it. And if it is not filled through Iman, then it would never be filled whatsoever through food, through popularity, fame, whatever it is, money, none of that is going to fill it, because you're basically feeding it the wrong substance. It's exactly like putting water in a fuel tank in your car, thinking that it will do because here it is. It's a transparent fluid, and I'll just put another transparent fluid and it would work. That's a completely different compound. It's a completely different element. It's a completely different compound. It will not work. You're manipulating yourself by thinking, but I will still make it work. I will do whatever it takes to make it work. It has to work. You're living a delusion and thinking that it is going to work one day. It will somehow bring about that energy within it. But that's a delusion that many will live in, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is right there telling us, well, here's one thing that you really need to grow in order to bring about that knowledge. What knowledge? The knowledge that is capable of making you live the peace, that is capable of making you live in balance, that is capable of giving you that power to move on in life, the power to go towards the purpose that preceded your existence. فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Aziz, is self-efficient, is basically, know that if Allah is Aziz, you are not. You're not Aziza, but you will get your Izzah only through Allah. What is Izzah? Honor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the place of honor. But you as a human being, you're trying to seek honor. So many will run in where they'll probably look after, hey, if I were to get money, people will basically recognize that, hey, I've got the money, they'll want to be close to me, and I've got the money, and I've got the fame, I've got the number of fans, I've got this, then people will give me some social status, some social weight, and I will basically through that secure my autonomy, secure my authority, secure my existence, secure, and the list goes on and on. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wanting you to recognize the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is part of knowing your and letting you know your own human psychology. So studying the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from one angle is also knowing the human psychology and what it is seeking. There's a whole ilm in where Islamic psychology is different than Western psychology. Western psychology, in where it considers that the individual is the center. Islamic psychology considers Allah is the center. Western psychology goes from the premise that that the individual is basically part of this matter in motion, in where the individual is basically seeking the same thing that the rest of the things in matter in motion, trying to seek some form of balance. So they'll basically work on feeding you whatever makes you feel good, whatever. Forget about guilt, forget about all those different things. You're in power, you are this, you're capable of this, and it basically gets you to some form of power. I'm not denying that, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Islamic psychology taught us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center. Once you let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be your center, that's when you're capable of letting you learn and know that you're not doing a self-manipulation, but you're actually living a reality, that Allah is the center, and that you and your weaknesses can never grow unless you connect with your Lord Almighty, for He is the one to grant honor, because He is the one that is all wise, because He is the one to know all the things of the past and the future and what is actually good for you, because He is the one to be in all knowledge of seeing things. He is, when you feel that moment of guilt, He is the one to be the Ghafoor, the most forgiving, the one that is giving you that forbearance. He is the one to actually give you all that you need to bring you that stability. He is the one that is all-knowing. He is a very important source for you to stay in conviction, because if you don't put the principles of the Lord Almighty, then what you will not recognize is that you are putting yourself in danger. So to stay in the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to avoid all the different things that will put you in danger. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling you, you need to learn, you need to know, you need to work on your conviction to go from the stage of just simple knowledge, just a general ma'rifah, to going into Ayn al-Yaqeen, Ilm al-Yaqeen, where you know to the level of yaqeen, level of such rooted knowledge that it becomes that faith in where it is changing your behavior, your commitment. It is deeply rooted that nothing will change it, because you recognize that it's a reality to hold on to. You recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center within this world, and you're not the center, but you're recognizing that it is part of your instinct that you're seeking a level of stability, and it is part of your instinct that you are in search of what? In search of 1, authority, 2, decision, 3, guidance. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ni'mal mawla. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your place of authority, is your place of that decision and conviction, and is the place of guidance, because you were created within your instinct that you're seeking that place of power. To get that empowerment, it could only be through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. The first and important knowledge that you really need to learn is that there's no God worthy of worship but Allah. Once that actually comes as something that your mind, your vision, your hearing, your heart, your body is living as that is the center, that's when you will actually come to realize that there is that level of peace in where I depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I recognize that He's going to give me that justice. I recognize that I'm dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't have to worry about the future too much, because I know my iman and faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know that rizq is in His hands. I know that success is in His hands. I know that shifa is in His hands. I know that whatever goes that is probably different than what I had really wanted, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alim, is khabir, that He's all-knowing, and that never whatsoever will the Lord Almighty decree any evil, because only good comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's when we would say, in where with the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ, of course, had actually said for Ubay ibn Ka'b, أتدري أي آية في كتاب الله أعظم? Do you know which ayah is the most important ayah in the Quran? He said, it is Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. It's the ayah of Ayat al-Kursi, that Allah, and there's no God worthy of worship but al-Hayy al-Qayyum. But who's al-Hayy? Al-Hayy is basically the eternal one, the one that would never whatsoever die. He is al-Hayy. He is immoral. Sorry, he is not immoral, but he is basically never to die. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you, and on the other hand, the first fear that you are immortal, it's in where al-Hayy is basically never to die. And for the human being, the first and most important thing that we're afraid of is death. Al-Qayyum, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Qayyum. Al-Qayyum, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence doesn't depend on anyone, but your existence depends from the early stages. You were dependent on your mom, you were dependent on your father. We got the chromosomes from mom and dad, and all of that was determining basically your existence. And then later on, you needed the nutrients and you needed to grow, and all of that needed to come in order to ensure your existence. But that's when, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you that, no, you recognize the truth of the matter about yourself. But in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is al-Qayyum. He is al-Qayyum, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the only one in this world to not depend on anyone whatsoever. The second that it depends on something else, that would cease to be a God. And then فضرب بيديه في صدره وقال ليهنك العلم أبا المنذر. In where what actually brings about true knowledge is basically that knowledge about the Lord Almighty. In where this is important, in where to really know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really what makes the true knowledge and the most important knowledge in knowing about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. Now, what we're going to do, inshallah, we're going to go for Ayat al-Kursi. All right. We're going to go for Ayat al-Kursi to, is it Ayat al-Kursi? We're going to go for Ayat al-Kursi to actually see where and how we could see within Ayat al-Kursi that area in where what the Prophet ﷺ describes, and it actually is the most important ayah in the Quran. And where Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. Let's look at this ayah. In where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us into realizing in where, let's actually look at this one. Perhaps it's a, oh, sorry about that. Let's see, view image. There we go. All right. Can you see what I'm sharing? Okay, here we go. So to look at this ayah, a couple of things to see in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first started out with Allah. We're going to talk about where the name comes from. What does Allah mean? La ilaha illahu. There's no God worthy of worship but Allah. Al-Hayy al-Qayyum. We're just going to count a couple names here first. Let's erase all of this, and then we're going to talk about the names, and let's see the names and what they're going to basically reflect. The first one, Allah. The second one, Al-Hayy. The third one, Al-Qayyum. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. له ما في السماوات. So, owner of the heavens and the earth. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم. So, يعلم. Let's put يعلم. ما ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء. Don't worry, I'll explain that in just a bit. And الحفظ, right there. Al-Ali, Al-Azim. Okay, then we're going, let's look at these words first. Allah basically means the God. There's no God worthy of worship but Him. He is Al-Hayy. Look at the ones that are underlined and focus on these ones. Al-Hayy, the immortal one, the one that is eternal. Al-Qayyum, the self-efficient, in where his life does not depend on anyone. His existence does not depend on anyone. No sleep or even the part of sleep or even any form of tiredness overcomes the Lord Almighty. In other words, He is the one that is basically the one to control and have the center of all powers. Unlike human beings, they would basically fall in different stages of sleep, different stages of weaknesses, different stages of perhaps not being able to overcome different things that will come at them. لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To Him belongs the heavens and the earth. What does that mean? So when we're speaking about to Him belonging the heavens and the earth, we're talking about right there in where ownership and what that entails. We'll get there, inshallah. Okay. له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. Number 3. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه. Who is going to be capable of, no one is capable of interceding unless the Lord Almighty wills. يعلم ما بين أيديهم. It knows what is ما بين أيديهم, what is coming in their future. وما خلفهم, what happened, whether we're talking about in place, what is behind the person in terms of place, or whether what is behind the person in terms of past. So here, let's go for the third one. This is relating to knowledge right there. We're going to get to one thing at a time. So be patient because we're trying to make a statement and a point right there. وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه. Here's the encompassment. Okay, sorry about that. I know it's misspelled. The encompassment. إلا بما شاء, unless He wills. وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض. وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض, and where the Lord Almighty's throne, not Himself, but the Lord Almighty's throne goes beyond. In fact, it encompasses the heavens and the earth. So that this is in order to let us realize that the Lord Almighty is basically beyond, look at this one, beyond the heavens and the earth. So beyond heavens and earth to basically mean beyond place and space. That's another one. And وَلَا يَؤُدُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. And even the preservation would not be something that the Lord Almighty is incapable of. For the Lord Almighty's energy, the Lord Almighty's work, the Lord Almighty's power is capable of not even being beyond in place and space, but even in bringing in the preservation and keeping things basically intact. وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. And he is al-Ali, to meaning that he is beyond all in whether we're speaking about power, whether we're speaking about in authority, whether we're speaking about control. All of that is basically al-Ali al-Azim, in where al-Azim is basically to take us into another form. What is al-Azim? Al-Azim is basically that the Lord Almighty is magnificent. Let's look into all of these points. Looking at these names, what they contain. Oh, we forgot to put this one. Al-Qayyum. Here we go. Self-efficient. Okay. Al-Hayy. Let's put the immortal part. Okay, here we go. In where, when you look at these names right there, they actually come in several categories. Number one, you could see in where Allah is giving us this definition for us to know, in where the word Allah itself is actually here coming in with two things. Number one, the word al, that is basically the identifying article, and the second one is ilah, the God. Now, here's one thing. In where al-ilah, the word ilah, is that word ilah, the word God, ilah in Lugha Arabiya. Is that a word to mean that it is derived from an idea? Or is that word itself is actually not conjugated? In other words, it's not derived from an idea, but is actually a word in itself, a noun in where it's called jamid, non-conjugated. It's not conjugated in where in itself it is basically coming from an idea, a particular idea, in where it is in itself a definition and a noun for something. Most scholars, they said it comes from three different areas. Number one, it comes from that a superpower. Two, a place of worship. Three, a place of affection. Do it again. Superpower, a place of worship, a place of affection. So when you look at the word God or deity or ilah, when you look at the word Allah, Allah is the place of affection, Allah is the place of power, Allah is the place of worship. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically let people know, well, what does it really mean to have faith in Allah? What does it mean to believe in Allah? Who is Allah? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, there's just recognize that there's no other Lord to be worshipped but the one that is al-Hayy, the one that brings life, the one that he himself is immortal. Because if he wasn't immortal, then he would not be capable of bringing life. So he is basically the source of life. If he is the source of life, well, what keeps life going? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, the only one is capable of keeping life going is basically the one that is self-efficient, that his life does not depend on someone else's effort or someone else's power, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in other words, it's exactly like if we were to say, can the sun be God? Why and why not? The sun can't be God because we know that the sun itself is losing energy. Because the sun is losing energy, we would know that the sun itself, there's no way that it made itself, because if it had made itself, it would have made itself be immortal by basically making its life be continuous. If it made itself from the start, then it would have been capable of making the way that it made itself from the first time. It would continuously make itself on and therefore become immortal. So when we look at the word al-Hayy al-Qayyum, it's basically to help us see that the Lord Almighty is telling you that your life depends on the one that brings life. Your existence depends on the one that is capable of ensuring existence, rizq, because he is the only one that is self-efficient. Your life contains a lot of weaknesses, but the Lord Almighty, no weakness overcomes the Lord Almighty, not even the form of sleep or the form of tiredness or any form of weakness. Why? Because the Lord Almighty, semicolon, because the Lord Almighty, just as he controls the heavens and the earth, just as he controls all of those powers, then the Lord Almighty, just for you to get an idea of what his power looks like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, well, there's no way that you can probably understand or even fathom what the Lord Almighty's power looks like, but I'll give you a hint. The hint is he's the owner of the heavens and the earth and everything on earth and everything on or within space and within the heavens that you don't even recognize. Just an idea, just a hint of what his power looks like, and for you to really see that his power is beyond your understanding of what, let's say, the borders of power looks like. Why the heavens and the earth? Why give the heavens and the earth as the comparison here? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another ayah in Surah Al-Dhariyat actually said that the space itself is actually expanding. In other words, there's no limit if the Lord Almighty and the space itself is expanding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge doesn't expand, but just to let you know that his power is even more than what space can expand into, that the Lord Almighty's power stretches far beyond, that his power is going even far beyond to how perhaps or even what the space can even stretch into. In where من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه. And even when we're speaking about man الذي يشفع عنده, who's capable of interceding, why the intercession part? The intercession part is really because many would take that area to seek some form of support. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no one is going to be capable of interceding or having some form of power, stand and share any powers with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless he wills. What power are we talking about? You're afraid of probably what's coming up in the future. And perhaps things in the past are probably haunting you till this day. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, don't let those that might claim that they would be sharing powers with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sharing forces with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, manipulate you to making you think that your life depends on them. Your life does not depend on anyone but Allah. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you the future and the past that are probably there where you're living in the middle of time. There's the space and there's the time that's probably right there haunting you and where you're not feeling secure. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, listen, He encompasses everything. His knowledge reaches out and stretches out farther than the space and the place and the time and basically everything in just to give you a hint, that is in where His knowledge about His encompassment and knowledge about the world, about yourself, about your space and the place and everything that is surrounding you, just to give you a hint. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't tell you how magnificent He is in Himself, in His entity. So He just gave you a hint in where just the throne itself, it basically fills السماوات and الأرض. Just the samawat and al-ard, the heavens and the earth, just the throne. He didn't tell you about His magnificence. He told you about the throne itself. If it's that magnificent, it's nothing that you could fathom. It's nothing that you can imagine and can encompass and whatsoever and think that you know everything about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that, listen, your knowledge about your future, your worry about the future, your worry and your sorrow from the past, and of course, your place and the environment that you're living in and the spaces that you might occupy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, listen, He's the one that surrounds with knowledge, with encompassment, with ownership, with the power to what keeps everything intact, whether in its life or whether in its the way that it will move on. Everything goes in its preservation, in its power, in its control. All of it goes only through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, He is the most magnificent and most high. Therefore, we're actually living in a lower world in where we might actually think we can control things, or sometimes our failures are basically taunting us. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, no, let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be your center. And that's where you will be capable of finding yourself, and you'll be capable of finding your own balance, and be capable of finding what in where you'll be finding that area in where what really makes the ilm is really the knowledge about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لِيَهْنِكَ الْعِلْمُ أَبَا الْمُنذِرِ, sorry, in where that true knowledge, in where knowing about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about Ayat al-Kursi, about Allah, about reaching that level of, let's call it the level of Iman, that's true knowledge. And where that's what will give you that happiness, that pleasure. Inshallah, we'll continue next week, inshallah, with the rest of the sessions about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah. And subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. And you can unmute yourselves, that's all right. Or you can write it in the chat.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Okay, so sometimes I'm kind of feel dumb to ask the question, but what is ta'khudhuhu sinatum wala nawm? I know sinatum is tired, right?
Is tired. So no, he doesn't get tired. Well, why, what was that response for? That was a response because the Yahud in the Old Testament basically claimed that
He said they
got
say
tired on
that
Shabbat.
they said Allah rested on the seventh day.
Exactly. So that's basically Shabbat, that he rested on the seventh day because he got tired. So that was in order to respond to them. So no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not get tired, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no tiredness takes and overcomes the Lord Almighty, and the Lord Almighty is basically right there displaying what his power looks like and what it means to actually be be in knowledge about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, but ta'khudhuhu, what does that mean again?
That khuduhu actually means to take. So
To
this
take. Okay, like
to,
khud. Okay.
exactly.
I get it. Sorry.
So what this is saying is like, you know, when you take something, when something takes you, so of course you're probably
Tiredness overtakes you, Yani.
overtakes you, it overcomes you. You're
Okay.
right there, and all of a sudden, you know, you're like wanting to fall asleep. It's like, I don't want to sleep. I'm having a good time. But then no, what can overcome you is something beyond your control. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying nothing is beyond his control, that is.
Okay, mashallah. Jazakallah khair. Sorry.
What, that's okay. All right. Any other questions? Yeah, inshallah, next week the class will be on the same day, inshallah, same time. And I will be sharing the links to the books, and inshallah, you know, we'll continue. We still didn't continue all of these, but inshallah, we'll continue all of these in speaking about the foundations, and we're still really right here with Ayat al-Kursi, but inshallah, we'll continue with all of these, and also continue going into sessions 2 and 3, inshallah, 6 sessions, and inshallah, hopefully we'll live with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant.